The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall courthouse windows as a heavy silence settled over the room. Everyone present felt a strange tension in the air, the kind that often precedes something unforgettable. At the front, the judge sat perched behind his massive oak bench, his gavel resting at his side as though it were an ornament rather than a tool of justice. His name was Judge Harrison, a man known not just for his strict rulings but for his arrogance, a man who relished every opportunity to showcase his superiority over anyone who dared stand before him. Across from him, standing in his uniform, was a tomb guard, one of the elite sentinels who watched over the resting place of the unknown soldier, a man bound by tradition, honor, and duty. The tomb guard's presence seemed out of place in the noisy world of lawyers, clerks, and reporters, yet he stood tall and unflinching, his posture as unbreakable as the marble stones he had guarded for years. But what truly unsettled the crowd was not his uniform or the silent discipline he carried, it was the faint smirk on Judge Harrison's face. He leaned back, tapping his pen against the wood, and when the room fell still, he let out a laugh that echoed like an insult. "So," he began, drawing the word out with deliberate mockery, "this is what they send me. A soldier who spends his life marching in circles around a tomb. Tell me, do you actually think that makes you important? Do you believe guarding silence is a real duty?" The courtroom buzzed with whispers, some shocked, some amused, but the tomb guard never flinched. He kept his chin raised, his eyes locked forward, his silence speaking louder than the jeers around him. That silence, however, only fueled the judge's arrogance. "Answer me," Harrison barked, slamming his palm against the bench. "What kind of man wastes his years standing beside a grave as though it makes him noble? This is a court of law, not a cemetery. Here, I decide what matters." He leaned forward, waiting for a reaction, but none came. The stillness of the soldier became unbearable, and somewhere in the room, a single cough seemed to echo louder than the gavel ever could. The tomb guard did not respond with words, and that very refusal to bend seemed to ignite the fire in the judge's pride. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison sneered, addressing the spectators, "this is what blind obedience does to a man. He becomes a statue, unable to think, unable to act, only following orders without question. Is that really honor? Or is it foolishness dressed in ceremony?" Laughter rippled through a few corners of the courtroom, hesitant at first but encouraged by the judge's tone. Yet others in the room shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the weight of the uniform the man wore and the history it carried. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, sensing that this exchange would be newsworthy, while lawyers from both sides exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should intervene or allow the spectacle to unfold. The soldier's silence seemed to grow heavier with every insult thrown his way, as though the room itself bowed beneath the weight of his composure. Then, finally, in a voice calm and steady, the tomb guard spoke. "Sir," he said, each word deliberate, "I do not answer mockery with argument. My duty is not to convince those who laugh, but to honor those who can no longer speak." The words, though simple, struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. For a brief moment, the smirk faltered on Judge Harrison's lips. But arrogance is not so easily silenced, and he quickly recovered. "How poetic," he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You honor the dead, while the living waste their time pretending it means something. Do you think guarding a tomb teaches you anything about justice, about law, about real responsibility?" He leaned forward, glaring at the soldier as though daring him to break. But the tomb guard's expression remained unchanged, his discipline forged in years of ritual, where not even rain, snow, or jeers from the crowd could shake his focus. Around them, the tension coiled tighter, and the air grew thick, as though the entire courthouse waited to see which man would break first, the arrogant judge or the silent sentinel. The tomb guard's silence became unbearable not just for the judge but for everyone watching. It was as if the entire courtroom had transformed into the plaza he once marched upon, an endless cycle of steps, discipline, and honor that no outsider could understand. Judge Harrison shifted in his chair, his arrogance now fighting against a flicker of unease. He could feel the eyes of the audience on him, not laughing now, but waiting, judging him in return. And so he struck harder, unwilling to admit defeat. "Tell me this," the judge demanded, raising his voice, "if your so-called duty is so sacred, why are you standing here like any other defendant, subject to the same laws as everyone else? If guarding a tomb makes you untouchable, then why do you need this court? Why do you need me?" He jabbed a finger at the soldier, as though pointing at a fraud who had been unmasked. But the tomb guard did not bow to the insult. Instead, his eyes shifted, just slightly, to meet the judge's gaze directly. "Because even a man of honor, he said, must sometimes stand before those who have none. The words dropped like a stone into a still pond, and the ripples spread quickly. A murmur swept through the room. Reporters paused their scribbling, their pens hovering midair. Lawyers froze in place. Even the bailiff seemed to stiffen, unsure of what to do next. Judge Harrison's face turned red, his pride wounded deeper than any sword could cut. He slammed his gavel down, though the sound only highlighted his desperation. "You will not speak to me like that," he shouted. "I am the authority in this room." But authority, once challenged, begins to tremble, and the judge could feel his control slipping. The tomb guard had not raised his voice, had not insulted, had not threatened, yet his calm words carried more weight than the judge's fury. At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The crowd no longer saw an arrogant judge ridiculing a silent soldier, they saw a man, cloaked in tradition and sacrifice, standing firm against mockery with nothing but dignity. The whispers turned into silence, and the silence turned into something heavier, respect. Some in the crowd remembered visiting the tomb of the unknown soldier, recalled the solemn ritual, the 21 steps, the precision, the sense of timeless honor. And now, seeing one of those sentinels standing before a judge who sneered at him, they felt the sharp sting of injustice. Judge Harrison, however, was blind to it. His pride would not allow him to step back. "You think silence makes you strong," he taunted, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. "It makes you weak. This is a court, and you will answer me properly, or you will face contempt." But before the tomb guard could respond, an elderly man in the back row stood up. His voice, though frail, carried across the courtroom. "That man has stood watch in storms you cannot imagine," he said. "He has carried out his duty while the world mocked, while tourists laughed, while thunder roared above him. And still, he never faltered. You, Judge Harrison, could not last 5 minutes in his shoes." Gasps erupted from the crowd, and Harrison's face twisted in rage. "Sit down," he roared at the old man. But the damage was done. The courtroom no longer belonged to the judge, it belonged to the story unfolding before their eyes, the story of a soldier's honor against arrogance. What happened next would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. The tomb guard, still standing tall, took a single step forward, not aggressive, not defiant, but measured, controlled, the kind of step that spoke of discipline so deep it had become second nature. The sound of his heel against the floor was louder than any gavel, echoing through the silent courtroom. He looked at the judge with eyes that had seen countless dawns rise over the marble tomb, eyes that understood sacrifice in a way Harrison never could. "You mock what you do not understand," he said quietly, but the quiet was more powerful than any shout. "You belittle sacrifice because you have never carried it. My duty is not to argue with you. My duty is to remember those who cannot speak for themselves. And while you sit in that chair, judging men and women who stand before you, I will continue my watch, for them, not for you." The room erupted in applause, not loud or chaotic, but steady, respectful, like the sound of rain on stone. The judge pounded his gavel in fury, demanding order, but the order was gone. Respect had shifted, and no one in that room looked at him the same way again. Judge Harrison had mocked the tomb guard, but in doing so, he revealed his own emptiness. The soldier had spoken only a handful of words, but those words carried centuries of honor. And though the case would continue, everyone knew the verdict that truly mattered had already been delivered, not by the court, but by the unshakable dignity of a silent guard who refused to be broken.